always remind me to return on the recording. We'll be sending that out to you all afterwards. If you see a little swirly in the chat, that's me chatting you all. We will be sending materials, so get excited for that. As always, if you want to be on camera, we love that. But also, if you have kids, creatures, pod, or housemates, they are also welcome to join because they can learn from it too. And always have something to take notes and process your thoughts. Next slide. And so today, I always like to start these sessions with an invitation. Today, I invite you to listen deeply. So take those deep breaths, be present, have that glass of water if you need it. Embrace discomfort and notice tension. Explore the why of those feelings if they come up. And don't forget to take care of yourself within that. Take risks. The big thing that I like to remind everybody here, it's something that I'm working on too, is to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. These systems of injustice weren't built in a day. They're not going to be dismantled in a day. And we need to be radical and vulnerable and take chances to really birth the world that we not only need, but we also deserve. And then finally, hold each other with compassion. I personally am of the mindset that social justice work is a practice. And sometimes when you're practicing something, you're not going to get it right. It doesn't mean that you can't learn from where you've gotten it wrong and change that behavior, but it does mean if we hold each other with compassion, we can bring folks in and bring them along the way with us. And so with that, I am so unbelievably excited to pass it on over to Virginia Community Voice again for an amazing session about how to have deep, impactful relationships and one-on-ones and all that good stuff. So take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelsey. So for those of you who were not here last month, my name is Leah Whitehurst Gibson. I'm the executive director for Virginia Community Voice and founded the organization with many others that, namely community members that worked with us to make this organization what it is. I'm always grateful to them. As you can see in my little bio, it says that I believe that my purpose in the nonprofit sector is to push back against conventional knowledge that has hurt and devalued my community, and organize people to focus on liberatory practices. I also love to cook. I love to spend time with family and friends, laughing and being merry. So yeah, so that's me. I'll let Josh Scott, who's actually going to be doing the heavy lifting today in this conversation. I'm just going to do a quick recap from last time, and then Josh will take it away. So I'm going to let have Josh, if you want to jump in and introduce yourself real quick.
Yeah, thanks so much. And thank you, Kelsey and Philanthropy Today for inviting me today. I'm Josh Scott. I'm the Director of Policy and Organizing at Community Voice. As my bio says, I think at heart, I'm a macro and micro problem solver. And the way that I operate in that in my vocation is through community organizing. But I'm really committed to see organizers, activists, allies be in this work for the long haul. And develop their skills along the way. If I'm not doing those things, I have 2 little boys. You can catch me running around with them somewhere. I also love watching anime, documentaries, sports, and I love to sing, usually R&B and gospel.
Thanks, Josh. And for context, Josh sang at my wedding. Like he is actually a good singer. So I'll do a quick recap of what we did, go through the agenda, and then I'll do a quick recap, and then mostly turn it over to Josh to get us started because we do have a lot of content, and I'm so glad that you all are here to be a part of this today. Obviously we already went through the flow. I'll do a quick recap of last session, and then we're going to jump right into an activity with you all. So you're going to throw you right in, and then we'll recap and talk through how the activity applies to building those strong relationships through one-to-ones and helping support a community and your giving circles through that process. And then we'll do a few next steps. And thank you for being here today. So that's where we're going and how the roadmap for today. So quickly, very quickly, because like I said, we have a lot of content. Virginia Community Voice Mission and Vision, you heard this last month. If you were not here, I'll say it again, is to equip neighbors in historically marginalized communities to realize their vision for their neighborhoods, and then to prepare institutions to respond effectively. That is, and our vision is a big one. We know that this is a vision that will likely outlive all of us, but we're going to work for it as if it can happen tomorrow as a Commonwealth of Virginia where decisions are made equitably. And we do that through two programs, RVA Thrives, which is our neighbor-focused program where we're working with neighbors on the south side of Richmond, Virginia, which is the capital of Virginia, if you're not familiar, every day to realize their vision for their community. And then the other program that we do is called our Blueprint, which is we have created a guide to community engagement that we have built training and coaching around, and we use that to help other institutions make more equitable decisions in their processes in the world. And so, so a quick recap of last month, the things that we kind of left you with, the big pieces were that we're going to really come back to today is committing to build relationships and doing community engagement. So thinking about like how we can use relationships to build strong giving circles and giving spaces, and thinking about that. And we talked about our courageous fundraising principles, if you remember that, those 4 principles that we have engaged with. And so those principles map really easily onto what we're going to be talking about today. So we talked about to make your giving more equitable through trusting BIPOC communities, centering them in the work, making transformative, not transactional investments, and seeking racial equity. This month, we're going to share how to do that through relational investment. We are one-to-ones is what we're gonna really focus on today. That is, Josh and I combined have about 30 years of experience in community organizing. And one-to-ones is one of them, is probably the most transformational tool that we use to engage community, to understand, to build trust, to develop a value system that centers community and specifically historically marginalized communities. And so we want to share this powerful tool with you today and talk with you through how to do that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Josh to kind of get into the nitty-gritty around it.
Thanks again, Leah. So one-to-ones are a tool created by community organizers that help us understand one another's motivations, our values, and interests in relation to your motivations, values, and interests, or those of your giving circle or your organization that you're coming from. They are face-to-face conversations that put you and your giving circle in the middle of the community and in the life of that person or in the life of another organization. And so there's no better way to learn about one-to-ones than to do them. So we're going to have some mini one-to-ones with each other. As you see here on the slide, we're going to have 20 minutes to do some relationship building. And so it's going to be broken up in 10 and 10. Okay. So for the first 10 minutes, let's say the younger person in your pairing has to lead the discussion and ask, what do you want to see change in your community? What keeps you up at night? Okay. So for the first 10 minutes, that person will lead the discussion. And you want to focus on asking why and why type questions. And that's because in order to build relationships of trust, we have to get down to the bare bones basics of what makes that person tick and their motivations, their values. So you want to ask why. And you don't have to keep asking why, right? But you can also ask why type questions. A why type question is like, how does that make you feel? Why does that bother you so much, right? It depends on what it is, right? You want to ask for stories and personal examples. One thing that I often tell folks that I train on one-to-ones is that we're getting people to be storytellers. We want to hear real evidence, real stories of their experience in the community. So if someone talks about they want to see more affordable housing in the community, again, some follow-up questions will be, why do you want to see more affordable housing? Have you struggled to pay your rent or mortgage, right? Or do you have loved ones that have struggled to pay your rent or mortgage? And then lastly, you want to find places to share about yourself. These are conversations. They're not one-way street, right? It's not a one-way street. You want to find places to share. So again, if someone's talking about affordable housing, you've heard from them for a little bit, find a place to say, yeah, I've also struggled with affordable housing, and to share your story. So again, you're going to have 20 minutes. The first 10 minutes will be led by the youngest person in the pairing. And the last one, and then we'll send a message to switch, and then the other person will lead the conversation. Okay. When we come back, we'll debrief and we'll kind of learn together when we come back. Make sense? Okay. So I'll turn to Kelsey to split us up. Yes. Yeah, we should don't abruptly end one-to-one conversations. Find a way to transition out, but no, we get it. It's all right. So I hope you guys had a good chance of getting to know each other and exploring a little bit. So what I'm going to do is teach you a little bit about one-to-ones, but I also want to hear from you all and debrief as we go. So let me pull our slides back up. We thought this was in our last session. I was told that's this really awesome GIF from Ted Lasso. If anybody watches Ted Lasso, I actually have not watched it, and it's only because I don't have Apple TV. But I agree with the statement. I completely agree, and that's what it's like, especially in one-to-ones. The focus of why we want to do one-to-ones is because it will transform your giving, but only by way of having strong relationships with those you are wanting to give to, or strong relationships in the communities that you dwell and operate in. So, and why is that? Now, there's three major reasons. One-to-ones are relationship centered, and the relationship centered by way of how a one-to-one is not, right? So one-to-ones are not spontaneous, meaning if they're spontaneous, you're not being intentional with the one or the community that you want to be in relationship with. So they're scheduled, they're pre-planned, right? They're thought out. You're going to actually call up someone or text someone and say, hey, I would love to get together, right? One-to-ones do not happen over the phone or by email or social media. These may be quick, they may be efficient. Capitalism tells us to have it well thought out and well worded, but they are not relational. Now you may use these things to get one-to-ones, but in order to build strong relationships, especially ones built on trust, you want to give them a call, again, to schedule something, ideally face-to-face. Obviously, some of these may happen on Zoom, as we just did, or in other virtual ways, but the best one-to-ones are face-to-face. They're also not a survey or checklist of questions or an interview. And we can often get into an interview mode when we get in these conversations, meaning we're just firing off questions and you're not sharing of yourself. One-to-ones are two-way, right? You're sharing of yourself and they're sharing of themselves as well. And they're absolutely not transactional. And that's something that Leah and Becca spoke to in our last session, meaning you're only there to take information, right? Or to take resources. That is not equity. It's able to place you in the community alongside with the community. That's what one-to-ones do. It places values on stories over numeric data. You may hear the story and then go look up, how is that looking in the rest of the community, right? It also values connection over tangible help. And what I mean by that is, I'm talking about affordable housing again. If someone has a story about affordable housing, at the heart of their story, they need their rent lowered, or they need something else so that they can afford their rent. Oftentimes they do need that, but people also just need people to know that their story is being heard. And so connection is almost as important or more important than tangibly helping people. So under this why, I'm curious to hear from a couple of you. What did you learn about your partner? And so I only see a handful of people on my screen. So Michelle, if you could tell us, and it's a Michelle Helstern, I'm not sure if we have multiple Michelles. Tell us where you're from, and then tell us who you met with and what's one thing you learned about them.
Hi, thank you, Josh, for calling me. I am Michelle Helstern. I am from Annapolis, Maryland. I am with and the Renville Women's Giving Together. It's an all women's volunteer collective giving circle of 320 members. I met with Gruff, and she is from SVP, representing Twin Cities in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And she really interesting story where she is now an alumni serving in the capacity where, her focus with their board in supporting their needs and giving them what they want is really serving the underfunded and um, looking at the racial, economics, and social justice, but more for the teenage population, which is completely unique and different from my experience in the Giving Circle. So we talked a lot about that in a domestic standpoint because her organization is also global, and how they all interchange, the same issues interchangeably are throughout the global experience. So it's really interesting. It's now got me thinking of ways on how we can reach our teenagers.
All right, great. And before you go off mute, just to help prove my point here, do you think you would have learned that without a conversation?
Absolutely not.
Yeah,
I wouldn't.
yeah. It's not a trick question, right? Right. We have to be able to talk with people in our community and talk to those that we're engaging with to build relationships, and to improve and really make our dollars go further in the community, right? Um, so great, thank you for that. One-to-ones are also still related to being relationship centered. They build trust, right? And the way that they build trust is, again, it's coming back to you sharing and also you articulating and acting in the interest they just shared with you. So again, one-to-ones are not an interview. I want to say that again. And because if you're asking something of them, you can extend that trust by sharing something of you. And so once you do that, you're going to find common ground, right? You're going to find places where you have things in common, and their trust can begin to be built, and you can begin to act in their interests. Just as we want to get deep with those that we're meeting with, one-to-one leaders, when you're leading a one-to-one, you also have to share and to be vulnerable. A tip that I also often give folks is that, remember, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? Which means you should talk 1/3 of the time and listen and be listening 2/3 of the time. But you still got to get to that 1/3, right? You still have to share of yourself. When you're doing regular one-to-ones, you will begin to offer them opportunities to get them to act in their self-interest and their values. Self-interest often gets a bad rap when we hear about it. We often get a negative gut reaction based on what we hear in the news and the media. In community organizing, it's a tool. It's an objective thing. It's what we want for ourselves in relation to what others want for themselves, right? And in some ways, I've already mentioned that already. There are many kinds of self-interest, based on this slide. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are some tips for how you know something is an interest, right? So if something's survival based, they start with I want or I need. Identity based, I am or I want to be. Relationship based, I respect or I care about. And values based, you often start with I believe. And so what do I mean by acting in people's interests, and what do I mean by offering opportunities? In the community organizing world, and I think this could translate well, we're often, and not often, always asking people to do something. This is kind of the case for many nonprofits, but especially for organizing. And it's because we're developing people's capacity to run their own organizations or to speak for themselves, right? And we're talking about everyday people, from janitors in our communities to retired nurses or retired teachers, right? To act in ways that's going to change their community, but put them in places where they don't have a lot of experience, in the halls of city council, or in the room of experts around how to raise reading levels and literacy rates within schools, right? And so we're asking them regularly and routinely to engage, to speak up, or to act. And those asks always has to tie back to their self-interest. What do they want? And based on what I've already heard from them saying or doing in the community. What's important to know is, however, is that, and this was on the last slide, a lot of interests compete with each other. And then when you start to work with many other people and groups, not everybody has the same interests, right? And a lot of them are going to compete as well. And so it takes some good reflection, and that's part of our blueprint, right? Is to routinely reflect on the things that you learned about people, or to reflect and evaluate on your processes, to understand how is this person or how are these group of people can work together towards something. So an example in my previous job is we worked on a drug treatment campaign. Before I knew where we were going as an organization, where we ended up with was an inpatient drug treatment center for women, that was built here locally in our community. At the time, women would have had to travel at least an hour to get to an available inpatient treatment facility. However, when often they got there, it was full. They had to be put on a wait list. And if you can imagine someone who's struggling with drug addiction and alcoholism, if you're told to go back home and see us back in 3 months, they're not going to be there, right? They're going to be back on the streets, right? Or somewhere worse, unfortunately. So that's where we ended up. We ended up with a treatment center and we were able to get built, and it was amazing. But to get there, I had to figure out who's going to help us get somewhere to do something for these women, something significant. And so I have a running list of people that I'm routinely working with, and I was in a faith-based organization, so it was with congregations. And I thought about a woman named Vicky. Vicky was Jewish, and it didn't matter the issues that she worked on, because she was a social worker. She had seen everything. But it was very clear to her, her faith was very clear to her, and she really understood the dignity of each person. I also wanted to get this guy, Tom, involved. He was Catholic, and he's been doing a lot of charity work. And in fact, he ran the homeless ministry in his congregation, which on its own could be its own homeless nonprofit. I also wanted to engage this pastor. Her name was Liz. And her congregation was a unique congregation. 80% of her members were chronically homeless, or struggling with substance abuse of some sort, or some sort of addiction. So these folks were already my best leaders, but I had to figure out how to get them to work together. So looking at this diagram, that's the three people. The common ground, I had to organize them around the common ground, which a lot of them had connections to people that were struggling with drug addiction, struggling with issues related to housing. And then Vicky, again, she could work on anything, because she really understood the dignity of people. And so doing the regular reflection allows us to get deeper and better understand each person or groups that we're meeting with, that I mentioned earlier can make your dollars go further, but also to do it in a more holistic and equitable way. So I'm going to turn it back over to you all. So let's see. Is it Guff? Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. So who did you meet with, and did you find that you had anything in common?
Sure. Well, I met with Michelle. So this is kind of fun to be
Oh.
able to share both of our experiences with everybody. And I apologize, my audio and video were off for a while, so I had to come back, Josh. So I might have
That's okay.
missed some of what you were saying. But I will say what Michelle and I had in common was there was just a real values-based approach to centering community, and also making sure that each of us and our collective giving groups are representing that community, and how, as a historically white-based sector that philanthropy is, and in both of our cases, her organization and my organization are historically white. What her organization is doing, and also what our organization is doing, both locally and globally, just to try to make sure that our efforts are community driven, and that if we are doing things in a just way, then we are truly representing our community. And that means making sure our groups, that we're centering the voices and centering the decision making and centering the design and the practices and procedures and all of that. So I think that was the big thing that I think we shared in common. Yeah. That 20 minutes flew for both of us. And so I sent her a message to say, hey, if you want to Zoom and continue the conversation, I would love that. And we both kind of shared that, philanthropy together, we just really appreciate you, because getting a chance to connect with Michelle and learn from her, I wouldn't have otherwise had that opportunity. And so just deep gratitude. And I think that's probably something else that we all share, that we do get this opportunity to reach across our organizations, across our communities, across our country and nations and world, and across the sector. And big thanks to all of you for helping to make that happen.
Thanks for sharing that. That's great. And again, if I was in that one-to-one, I would even go further to ask questions like, what does that look like to recenter the organization on Black and brown folks? Also to create a little bit of tension. What happens if we don't, right? And to begin to tease that out. Let's get one more. So Betty, who did you meet with, and did you all have anything in common?
Well, we thought at 10 minutes you were going to tell us that it was time to switch and go to the other person. You did not tell us that. So
I thought we did.
Well, not in our group anyway.
Oh, okay.
Broadcast come through. Sorry.
So we did not both talk.
All righty. Who did you meet with?
Bob Becker.
Okay. And so I guess tell us one thing that you learned about Bob then.
I didn't learn anything because he didn't talk. I talked.
Oh, okay. Well, let me ask Bob.
You'll have to ask Bob what he
thought. Bob,
Bob had to go. Bob had to.
I think Bob was signing off. So.
All right. Well, we're running low on time, so I just have one more, a couple more slides for you guys. So the last thing about one-to-ones is that they help you learn about yourself, and probably not probably, but also your organization or your giving circle. What do we truly believe, and what are the ramifications, right? The first thing you're going to learn about yourself in these conversations are, how comfortable am I asking probing questions? Asking in one-to-one conversations, you're asking some questions that many people probably have never been asked before. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But generally we're taught to mind our business, right? To not pry. And I think that is a disservice of the culture that we're in today of not really knowing your neighbor, right? So I want to encourage you to be courageous and to be curious. Again, I tell my colleagues, you don't know if you've crossed the line until you've crossed it. And you clearly may be in a conversation that is sensitive, but you could always ask, do you mind, or say, do you mind if I ask, right? If they say yes, go ahead and ask. If they say no, that's okay. You can move on to something else. We also are going to learn about ourselves in our own personal stories. And that's because we don't regularly reflect on our stories. Now, some of us may be in counseling or something like that to get a better understanding of our own lives, and that's fine. But we still can't get at necessarily the stuff that's related to our philanthropy or the advocacy work that we do in counseling. So they're more personal things. So as you prepare for one-to-ones, as you think about going into a one-to-one, sometimes you think through your own story and what you're going to share, and you create some space to think about, how do I feel about that? What did that mean to me, right? One example of this for me is I met with the imam, which is basically a pastor or a clergy for a Muslim mosque, right? And I have very little experience with that leading up to this point. I grew up in a very rural area and didn't know anyone that was Muslim. And I knew I wanted to make a good first impression, but it's not about just kind of smiling and laughing at the jokes. I wanted to find some way to show him that I really want to work deeply within his congregation and to help them do some justice. And that was the work that we were doing. So I began to reflect on, before the meeting, what did I know about Islam and what do I want to know? And at the time, I was pregnant. We were pregnant with our first child. And I also thought about, what do I want my kid to know? Because I knew I wanted their life to be different from my growing up. And so I shared some stories around that. And then I posed the question to him, how do you want others to view your mosque in this town? And that we talked about that for 30 minutes, right? Now there were more why questions, more probing questions in there. But that's how you can learn more about yourself as you do one-to-ones as well. So as we kind of come to a close, I just have a couple more tips for you. This is not therapy, right? We're not asking you to go into your communities and try to get someone's whole life story. You are leading the conversation. You want to keep it focused, and it's probably best to keep it focused on the needs of the community, or the specific ways that your giving circle is engaging with the community. Focus on getting stories, not single sentence answers. And again, you can do that by asking why, saying things like, can you give me an example? Excuse me. And you can model storytelling. As I mentioned from my last story, I shared my thoughts first, my story first, and then I asked the question. It is hard to do this, but do not take notes during the meeting. Again, this is a relational exercise. And so you want to immerse yourself, be fully in the moment. When you're taking notes, it's going to feel like an interview. And we already said it's not an interview, right? Try your best to immediately after the one-to-one take notes, right? Even if it's just quickly jotting down things, going around the corner and jotting down things, try your best to save your notes for after. And then lastly, one-to-ones are not a place to solve problems. So I mentioned the story about, or the example of someone saying they want more affordable housing in their community. It's not going to be a good idea to kind of say, well, have you heard of this? And have you heard of that? And, have you seen this resource? You may want to work yourself to that point. But in the moment, you're looking to just build a relationship, not to just go in and solve their problems. I think we're out of time, but I'm fine if anyone's able to stay. If there are any other additional questions, or concerns about doing these kind of conversation.
If there are no questions, I just want to give a big thank you to Virginia Community Voice. This was a really juicy session. I even learned some things. I'm thinking back to one-on-ones that I've hosted before. And for those of you who do have a question and want to stay back, please feel free to stay back. I know Josh has a little bit more time to answer questions. Thank you all for joining us. This was a really great training, and keep an eye out for our next session. And in the meantime, I would be remiss if I didn't encourage you all to sign up for We Give Summit. If you like trainings like this, we have 3 days coming up of amazing trainings and talks and all of that good stuff. And so with that, for those of you who are headed out, have a great day. And if anybody has any questions, please feel free to pop off mic and ask. Josh, I actually have a question for you. I'm gonna
Cool.
stop the recording. Oh.